Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 26th edition of Lunenburg Town Council. This is a regular public meeting of our council, and we've got important items, as we always do, on our agenda. So I would get started right away with the business at hand, and the first item on our agenda is an approval of same. So I would look to Councillor Risser for moving the approval of the agenda, seconded by Councillor Bachman. And just a reminder note that the priority items are bold. So if we are getting short on time, we always defer to those items. So all in favor of the agenda? And I am unable to see one of our councillors.
Your worship, when you were incommunicado there for a while, Joseph mentioned that he's just back from a therapy and he may have to drop out. So that's maybe what's happened.
Okay, all right. So that is who I'm not able to see. So nevertheless, we hope that Councillor Carnevale is able to rejoin us, and the motion is approved, or motion is carried, and the agenda is approved. And next on our agenda is a review of our meeting minutes of May 19, 2020. So if we could have a motion to move those minutes, Councillor Croft and Deputy Mayor McGee. Thank you. Any notes, errors, omissions? There aren't any. We will go for the question. All in favor? Meeting minutes approval? And there is no one left to oppose, so that motion too is approved, carried and approved. Next on our agenda is placeholders for public hearings and presentations, and following that, correspondence, and we have none for those categories. So under committee meeting minutes and recommendations, there's one set of meeting notes for our review, and that's from Project Lunenburg, the steering team meeting of May 13th. Just note with a bit of excitement and anticipation that we should receive a draft of the CCP sometime later this week, I believe. And I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to point out or mention, Councillor Risser, as chair of that steering team.
No, I think that just about covers it for now.
Looking very forward to seeing the draft document and having this move ahead. So we'll move right into our priority item for the day, which is the budget for 2021. And we have our finance director, Lisa Dagley, and our accountant, Kathleen Refuse, with us to lead us through that document, and they have prepared a presentation for us to highlight information of greatest importance. So I will turn the table over to Ms. Dagley to carry us through the presentation. Thanks.
I can't hear you, Lisa.
Yes, I have to press unmute my Councillor McGee, sorry. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Before you today is the 2021 operating and capital budgets for consideration for approval. The next slide, Heather. Council and staff began the process of drafting the 2021 budget back in November of 2019. At that time, Council approved the wastewater treatment and collection improvements and upgrades as the budget priority for the upcoming fiscal year. Next page, Heather. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the provincial state of emergency in March, the 2021 operating and capital budgets were reconsidered by staff to reflect the economic challenges of this crisis. Next slide, Heather. On April 28th, The redrafted 2020-21 operating and capital budgets were reviewed by council. Following the meeting, we advertised the budget over our social media platforms, seeking public input on the draft budget. 2 submissions were received, and they have been included in the agenda package today. Next slide, Heather. So to recap, the redrafted 2021 budget has been adjusted for revenue reductions in the amount of $363,400. Next page, Heather. As Nova Scotia municipalities cannot budget for a deficit, the revenue reductions have been offset by reductions to operating expenditures by the same amount. I did want to point out that because the province has said that the municipal elections will proceed this fall, that the budget for the 2020 municipal election has been increased by $20,000, as the town will need to consider electronic or phone voting. Next page, Heather. Capital budgets were reviewed, and projects or equipment that could be deferred to another fiscal year have been deferred. Next slide, Heather. While we've been under a provincial state of emergency since March 22nd due to the COVID-19 health pandemic, municipal services have continued, such as policing with the RCMP, fire protection through our volunteer fire department, garbage collection, wastewater and stormwater treatment, water treatment, and the many transportation services provided by our Public Works Department. This slide represents how your tax dollar is allocated within the budget. The services I just listed and others provided to our community still require funding for their continued operations. Next slide, Heather. The majority of these services are paid through for property taxes, as we have very limited funding from other levels of government. 45% of revenues are generated from residential property taxes, and 22% is generated from commercial property taxes. Next slide, Heather. Council has provided the following supports to taxpayers impacted by the financial hardship of COVID-19, with such interest deferrals on property taxes and sewer payments and water and electricity bills. The interest rate for property taxes has been reduced effective July 1st from 2% to 1.5% per month, and the income amounts for low-income property tax relief program have been increased to allow for more participation in the program. Next slide, Heather. Considering the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the taxpayers of the town of the Lunenburg, the draft 2020-21 budget includes tax reductions for both residential and commercial taxpayers. The residential tax rate has been reduced by ½ cent to $1.346, and the commercial tax rate has been reduced by 4 cents to 3.318. Next slide, Heather. The chart just summarizes the draft 2020 rates as compared to the 2020 or 2019-20 approved rates. Next slide, Heather. As previously noted, Council's budget priority for 2021 budget is the wastewater treatment and collection system improvements. The draft 2021 sewer rates support this critical infrastructure. Next slide, Heather. The draft residential sewer rate is proposed to be $494.60 for fiscal 2021. This is an increase of $10 per month or $120 for the year. The draft non-residential or commercial rate is proposed to set at 47.26 cents per $100 of assessment, which is an increase of 6 cents, 6.06%. The next slide, Heather. So this is our our budget schedule, which summarizes the efforts that council and staff have put into the 2021 fiscal plan for the town of Lunenburg. At this point, I wanted to stop and just to review a few items before council considers the draft motions for approval of the budget. For council, the budget document, I would like you to reference page 100, or if you're looking at the full agenda package, it would be on page 145. I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to find it in their agenda package.
What were those pages again, Lisa, please?
Certainly, it's so if you're looking in the just the budget document, it's page 101. Or if you're looking in the full agenda package, it's page 145. Are we good to go on, Your Worship?
I have it. Is are the rest of council look found it? Good. Okay. I think we're good.
Okay. So there were just a few items. I'm getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if somebody's unmuted that we can. Is that's better. Thank you. So there were a few items that sort of had additional notes since our April 28th budget meeting. So I just wanted to bring those to council's attention. So the items are highlighted in yellow on this page. The first one was the splash pad, and just it had been on a previous council agenda that we did not receive the Nova Scotia Recreation Facilities Development Grant. And included in your agenda package for today was correspondence from the Lunenburg Community Development Group. So in light of all of those things, staff are recommending that this project be forwarded to the 10-year capital plan for future budget considerations rather than proceeding with this project in this fiscal year. If there aren't any questions on that, I can move on to the next item that I have highlighted.
Go ahead. I don't see any indication.
Okay, thank you. I can only see a few people with the screen shared. So the next two items I just wanted to point out were the items under the fire department, the floor scrubber and the garbage bin. That we had proposed that the district share these items 50-50 with the town. And they have indicated in the correspondence is included in your agenda that they are not able to do that this year. So staff are recommending that the additional 50% come from the general capital reserve. I have reached out to the district to ask them to reconsider that item, and certainly will bring that forward to council if that is favorable.
I think Councillor Bachman may have a question.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Just would Lisa be looking for these recommendations now, or we do them later on in the program?
They could be part of the overall budget approval, Councillor Bachman. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that there were changes from the previous document. So then the next item, if there aren't any additional questions on that particular one, Your Worship.
I don't think so. Carry on.
So then I just wanted to point out about the ice resurfacer. You'll see in your agenda package that there was correspondence from the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, which they have approved a $40,000 operating grant to the town of Lunenburg for this fiscal year, which we are in grateful receipt of. We were originally only budgeting for 30 at the same level as last year. So that additional $10,000 does allow for us to have a $10,000 amount that we could contribute to the ice resurfacer. So I just wanted to point that out to council's attention.
Any questions? Okay, carry on, Lisa.
Okay, and then the next item is on the next page, on page 102 or 146 if you're looking in the full agenda package. It's about halfway down the page. It is also highlighted in yellow. So this is water and wastewater system and GIS development program. And staff have become aware of FCM asset management program that this project should qualify for funding of 75% towards. And just wanted to point that out. This item has been included in the budget, shared originally between the wastewater and water. We've shifted it a bit because of the funding. But it will require a special motion, which has been incorporated in the other draft motions later on in the presentation for council's consideration.
Any questions with respect to that one? Anyone? Good.
Okay.
No, I think we're all good. You've explained it out very well.
All right, well, thank you. And I just wanted to point one other item out, your worship. It wasn't highlighted in yellow, but it is, I just wanted to point out that there was some ongoing items happening with it. Under the lift station capital pump repairs, it's on page 101, probably about a third of the way down. And that I understand that the Public Works has received some information very late last week that may impact this budget, and that the additional information may be brought forward in a future meeting. But I just wanted to point out that if there was to be an adjustment to that, it would not impact the tax or sewer rates that were being proposed today. I didn't know if there were any additional questions on that, or really any other items within the budget before we consider the draft motions.
Right. So I thank you very much for this, very clear detailing of what's in the budget. And I love the pie charts. I find them personally very helpful to put things in perspective. And all of the notes and the comprehensive way in which we receive this information is truly appreciated. We have had some concern from some local small business about the fact that we have to move ahead with property tax bills, and we have tried to do what we could with the deferrals of interest and lowering of interest, and with for taxes and utilities. And in trying to we have actually reduced the commercial tax rate this year as well, with extra effort being undertaken to do that in light of the serious circumstances we know everybody's in as far as business is concerned, and the public health emergency situation. But certainly the staff have prepared some draft motions that speak to what we need to approve for today, or what we're hoping to have. They're hoping to have approved for today, but we certainly want to allow time for councillors to ask any further questions of staff. Yes, Councillor Isser.
Thank you, Worship. Lisa, I basically have one question in two parts. First is, how do we compare to other units in terms of our projected revenue reductions. And secondly, basically, what's the contingency plan if the projections, if the actuals are worse than the projection?
So certainly, through you, your worship.
Yes.
So, every municipal unit is obviously unique. And I at this point do not have across the board information of what other municipal units may be having for reductions. What there is NSFM has done a survey that they've asked us to respond by June 1st, collecting sort of all of that kind of information of what kind of reduced revenues are expected within municipalities, but that hasn't been assembled at this point, Councillor Risser. And as far as if actuals turn out to be worse than we've projected, that is a possibility, though we've taken great pains to try to figure out the unknowns and make them as conservative as we could. But that would be monitored through our monthly variance report process. And if it comes that we would see that things are just not working out as our plan is laid out, that we would have to make adjustments at that time.
Thanks.
And Councillor Croft and then Deputy Mayor McGee.
Worship, I just wanted to ask how we're going to correspond back to some of the letters that we got of concern over the budget numbers, and who's going to do that, or should we do that?
Do you want me to respond to that, Your Worship? Or?
Yes, please. I know it was about correspondence. Yes, so please do.
Well, certainly I have corresponded with one of the submissions to date about that, and certainly could follow up with both of them after this meeting if you like.
Yes, I would say certainly would respond to them. And I know that our finance staff has provided information to Mr. Rodden about his concern. And the other, I think, is just very late appearing. So don't know that there's been an opportunity, but certainly we would endeavor to reach out to the folks to address their concerns. Anything further, Councillor Croft, on that? Deputy Mayor?
Your Worship, through to Lisa, well, first off, this must have been a very difficult job. And I think it's been mildly difficult for us because, there's really nothing new we can put in here. I mean, we're all we can talk about are where we can save and where we can cut. And but just a very small question. Do you feel you're being a little conservative on the potential gas or fuel savings? They're saying fuel prices are going to be down for a couple of years now, and so hopefully they'll stay. Or do we have a contract that we're committed to for a year or something like that? But
we do have a tender for our fuel pricing that I believe we're in year 2 of 3. For that. I tend to use the approach that I'm more conservative. I try to be very conservative on the revenue side, obviously like under estimating the revenues. And I also try to be conservative to have some conservative in the expenses, because you don't want to cut them too deeply and then something changes and then you don't have enough, right? Because we can't budget for a deficit. Those would be the things though that we would monitor, that Councillor Risser had mentioned, like that if we do have to make additional cuts because revenues aren't even what we expected, that those would be some of those areas that we would look at, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, things will go both ways, I'm sure, that some will make on, some will lose on, but thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. I just mentioned too that the Ms. Dagley mentioned that the survey was being undertaken, and the NSFM has been working on our behalf as well and negotiating with the province, and there further on is the loan program that's been worked out with the province as well, which may be required should we have monies that should there be folks who aren't able to meet their tax bill requirements in the time allowed. So there are some options that we have to work with to address that as well. I guess we'll talk about that more fully when we get to the policy review for that. Any other questions? No. Then, Ms. Dagley, would you like to move ahead with the?
Certainly, Your Worship. So Heather, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides again. So then the next series of slides are proposed motions, Your Worship. And the first motion to be considered would be setting of the tax rates for the upcoming fiscal year.
Right, so that's been spelled out for us. It's, various locations in the document, but if we could have approval of those or motion spelling out those draft motions, that would be helpful. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
We're looking to do this one motion at a time, Your Worship?
I think that was just help, because it's awkward to do this and to see everything all at once and to everyone know what we're doing. I think that was what we were thinking, but it could be, those two, for example, could go together. I think.
Yes, they could go either way, Your Worship.
I'll move them, both of them.
Okay, thank you. And I saw Councillor Moser first as a seconder for the motions as they appear in the presentation. So moved and seconded, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Moser. That, oh, now I've lost it. Oh, there we go. So are there any further discussion on those, that the tax rates are set 134.6 for residential, 318 for commercial, 2489 for seasonal, and the sewer rates are there as well. Thank you. Yes. So there are, let's see everyone again. There are no further questions. I will
Councillor
call
Croft
for.
has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Can't see you all at once, so I have to scroll a little bit. So sorry, Councillor Croft, go ahead.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we can't see each other when we're making motions, but anyways, I appreciate all the effort that staff has put into putting this budget together. I still think in my mind, the rates are still too high. All the drawing back
I'm sorry, Councillor Croft, we're having real difficulty hearing you. You just break up mid-word, so I don't know if slowing down might help.
I'll try again. Is that any better? Okay. As I was saying, I appreciate the effort that staff has done putting this budget together. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort, and I still think the rates are too high for the trying times we have with people struggling, business struggling, and I think it's going to be a big effort for some people to meet these things. So, hope you can hear me. My computer is saying my speaker's not working. So anyway, I'll be voting against the motion.
Okay. Thanks for your comments. I think we caught most of them, or the bulk of what you had to say. Yes, Councillor Moser.
Through to Lisa, Your Worship. I mean, every year we always go through the struggle of keeping our rates down, and I know this year we're under, you know, a little more extraordinary circumstances. And I do applaud you for, you know, the efforts you've made to do this. But from a perspective of, I mean, savings, I mean, what are we, are there some major things that, obvious things, I guess I should say, that we're not doing because of this?
Are you talking about things that would impact service levels? Because we tried to make sure that all of the cuts that we did incorporate did not impact service levels or minimal impact to service levels. Certainly the major things that we would be avoiding was deferring some capital items and reserve transfers particularly.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions before we call for the question? I'm not seeing any, so all in favor of the motion signify aye. Those opposed? So Councillor Croft is in opposition, but all other members voted in favor, so the motion has carried. And those rates are approved. Thank you. And we have some other motions for consideration.
Yes, if Ms. McCollum wants to bring up, yes, the next slide was, so the next two motions are approving, and they could be combined as one motion if you wish, Your Worship, approving the operating budget and approving the town capital budget for fiscal 2021.
And I would look for someone to move that. I guess it's probably, we're required to do it. We've approved the rates to get to those numbers, I think, but I guess it's important to sort of spell it out. So 2021 operating budget, we're running in at 7,113,300, and for capital 1,718,300. We're going to have a motion to that effect.
So moved, Your Worship.
Moved by Councillor Bachmann. Is there a seconder? Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Any discussion then? Yes, Councillor Croft, go ahead.
I guess I'm in favor of the capital budget, but I'm certainly going to vote against the operating budget. So I don't know if we can break it in two parts or not.
I think we probably could do that if that's okay with the mover, and unless there's any opposition to that, we can move ahead with the first off. I think first up was the operating budget, so we would deal with that first. Any further questions on the operating budget? No. So, sorry, was there? So for Ms. Renton's and Ms. Kofi's benefit, where the motion was broken up into first the operating budget, so alone without the capital. So all in favor of the operating budget for the amount indicated in the motion made? Opposed? Again, so with the same, the motion is carried. Councillor Croft being the sole person opposed to that motion. So could I impose on the same councillors then to who moved and seconded them together to do a second motion? Yes, Councillor Bachmann and the Deputy Mayor to second the capital budget amount of 1,718,300. Yes, and Councillor Moser, you have a question?
Yes, so we're still spending $1.7 million on on capital. So where are our major expenses there, Lisa?
Well, certainly, through your worship, one of the major ones would certainly be the purchase of the new fire truck for 755,000 and change. And then the other items would be, I'm just trying to think the next, included in that draft budget is still the Tanner Road sidewalk at $255,000. And those would be the bigger ticket items, but there is certainly a significant investment in the wastewater treatment, but they're in multiple projects.
So just with regarding the fire truck though, I mean, that's the whole amount in like for this year. I mean, that would get obviously, you know, spread over, we're borrowing for that, right? We're not like paying cash for it in one fiscal period.
That is correct. But that is how it works. So when we purchase it, the whole amount is expended at that point, and then we have a loan that we have to pay back over time.
Okay.
That is then expended in the operating budget in future years.
Okay, so we basically got fire truck, sidewalk, and wastewater work that we're doing this year. Those are the three major things.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Croft?
Through your worship to Lisa, then the ice resurfacer and the program for that, and is there still fundraising going to be attempted for that? And I'm just wondering how that process is going to work for that. Or are we fully funding that right now?
Well, as of this point, we still do not have $43,000 needed to fund that item. And we are seeking some grants on that, but we haven't heard back yet. I do think our ability for fundraising, if we're unsuccessful in that grant, will certainly be limited in this fiscal year, considering the financial impact. We certainly have to bring that back to council to see how we move forward on that item at that time.
Thank you. Any further questions? If there aren't none, I would ask for the vote. So all in favor of the capital budget as presented? Any opposed? None. Motion is carried. And that budget is approved. So we can then move on to the next part, which is we have our water utility budget. Is, I believe, next. So that as a utility is this separate. Sorry, you go ahead. Yeah, you can explain it better than.
So there is motions before council here for approval of the operating water utility budget or in the capital water utility budget. Those can be as one motion or two separate if council wishes. And then there is that motion that I was speaking of earlier for approval to apply for the FCM Municipal Asset Management Program for that capital item of the GIS survey development for the water and wastewater. So they can be two motions or three motions if council wishes.
Okay, look to members of council to speak to these items on this page. Yes.
I'll move the operating and capital budget.
I'll second it.
Great, thank you. Moved by Councillor Resurfacer, seconded by Councillor Moser, that we approve the operating and capital budgets for our water utility. Any questions on this one? I don't see anyone confused or needing further clarification. So all in favor? Any opposed? I see there is no one to oppose, as all are in favor, and the motion is carried. And those budgets are therefore approved. the next item would you like to speak further to?
Certainly, Your Worship. So that next item was the motion for approval of the submission of a grant application for the water and wastewater survey, system survey and GIS development.
Yes. Oh, yes. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
No, just I'd like to move it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay, and seconded by Councillor Risser. Thank you. Councillor Carnevale, do you have a question, or was that a request to second?
To second it.
Okay, thanks. I have 2 seconders. I didn't see you quickly enough. Yeah, so this is actually a wonderful opportunity that I hope we'll be able to take advantage of and get something which we had been on our docket and was threatened by our current situation, but with this opportunity for additional funding, we may well be able to go ahead with it. So great. And no further questions, comments. All in favor of the approval of the submission for a FCM program grant? Any opposed? No one is opposed. Motion is carried, and we'll move forward with that application. Thank you very much.
And then there's just one last slide, Your Worship, and that is for our electric utility. And again, this could be 2 separate motions or 1 combined motion for the approval of the electric operating and capital budget.
Great. So we have the figures there and pulled from the budget document. So can I have a mover for the motion proposed? Thank you, Councillor Risser. Is there a seconder on that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can't see everyone, sorry, on the same thing. So it's moved by Councillor Risser, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, the approval of the electric utility budgets, operating and capital. Any questions for Ms. Dagley on that? Yes, Councillor Croft, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship Lisa. Then, are we still under a contract with Nova Scotia Power, or have rates gone up there? Can you verify that, please?
So I assume you're referring to our service agreement. Yes, and yes, we are. That service agreement started on January 1 of 2018. It was for a 5-year term. And so we're just coming up onto the anniversary of our 2nd year. And there's just an annual CPI adjustment on that agreement.
Thanks for that. Anyone? Any other questions? I don't see any indications of that. So I would again ask for the vote. So all in favor of approving the electric utility budgets? And all are in favor, so no one to be opposed, and the motion is carried and the budget is approved. So thank you all very much for getting through all of those budgets, and thanks very much to our finance staff, but also to all of our staff. I know they have looked and looked again and looked again and reviewed it for us repeatedly, and on the first go round, and then again on version 2 when the public health emergency hit and we had to seriously adjust the figures. And I'm very grateful for all the time and dedication put into this. And we will, as Ms. Dagley mentioned, we'll be working with this document from here on in, but we will be receiving variance reports regularly. And if adjustments need to be made as time moves on in areas and our world changes again, we will deal with that. We will deal with that through the variance report process. So so thank you very much. Looking at the policy, I guess, is the next item on the agenda. So again, I turn to Ms. Dagley to speak to that, and that's the operating loan program that I was speaking about earlier may be a little clearer with an explanation and that policy development. So thanks very much.
Certainly, Your Worship. So there is a staff report there for Council's consideration. I'll just summarize briefly. So municipal taxpayers obviously have been financially impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this proposed property tax financing program has been developed between the NSFM, or the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, and the AMA, by leveraging the provincial loan program, which was announced on April 28th, to municipalities to assist those taxpayers. As we're all aware, municipalities don't have the legislative authority to offer tax deferrals, but this policy, if implemented, would give taxpayers an option to finance their 2020-21 property taxes at a very low interest rate, because it's leveraging the provincial borrowing capacity. Taxpayers would be required to submit an application to receive this support. The program would only be applicable to the 2021 taxes. Obviously, to carry out this program, there will be some administrative burden within the finance department to carry this out. The amount of time or effort that will take is difficult to determine with not knowing what the uptake of the program will be. The town would need to borrow funds through this provincial loan program to municipalities. The interest rate from MFC is set at 1.1%, and there would be an overhead charge by the town of a quarter percent. The program is designed for those participating in the program to cover the interest, and this borrowing wouldn't impact the town's borrowing capacity. I know the policy is quite lengthy. It was drafted by members of AMA committee and has been customized for the town. I certainly can answer questions, or hopefully can answer questions if councillors have those.
Are there questions with respect to this? Yes, Councillor Moser.
Well, not so much a question as a comment that I guess it's better than nothing, but when you read through this, it's really not much at the end of the day.
It is unfortunate, and that wasn't sort of what the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities was hoping to receive from the province, but it's the best we have from what we've been given at this time to work with.
It is a bit of a safeguard for us, but not, yes, certainly not as big a help as we would have hoped for our taxpayers. Sorry, Deputy Mayor McGee.
Your Worship, I guess first a comment and then a question. The big fear I would have with this is that we're just digging people into a hole, that they're going to pay $25 a month for the first several months, and then 1/24 of the balance for the next 24 months after that. And, an average house is probably about $2,500, Lisa, something in that range anyways. So, we're just, if this pandemic goes on for any length of time, I mean, they're going to be digging themselves into a hole that they may never get out of. So that's a comment. But a question that I've got for Lisa is that do we you're saying potentially up to $1.8 million in deferrals that we would be able to, not deferrals, but in financing, but can we just sort of borrow that as we need it?
Yes and no, which isn't the great answer. Certainly each municipality we all use the same percentages that they provided. Like if you're in this industry, we use this percentage. And so we all use those same sort of estimates of our perhaps need sort of thing. And that's what determined the amount that the provincial government announced for the loan program. Though there were some municipalities that didn't report, so obviously their amounts haven't been included. But we are able to take multiple draws, and that is why I would like to wait until we see what kind of uptake there is on the program before we would go ahead and borrow more than what we would actually need. I guess.
But you need a motion today to approve the participation in the program then? Is that what we're looking
At
for?
this point today, no, we would just be looking for a notice of motion of the policy. We're not doing anything with the borrowing at this point. I thought I would bring that forward once we decided if we did want to proceed with the policy, we'd bring that forward to perhaps the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very good points. It is a policy. It's, a tool we just need to have at our disposal should we want to make use of it, I guess. And so a policy is required to do that. So we would be looking for a notice of motion that would come on approval of this policy, which would come forward to a next meeting of council if someone wants to provide that. Thank you. Councillor Bachmann will provide notice of motion for the approval of this policy, and we'll see it on an upcoming council agenda. So then the next item under this very long list of budget related items is scheduling of an additional general government committee meeting. We have our regular meeting doesn't come up until July. We have an amount within our budget to a budget allotment to provide some grants for organizations who have requested grant funding from us. And so I'm looking to set a meeting of the General Government Committee, which is comprised of all of members of council, to just review those applications to make recommendations to the council, another council meeting. So we had talked about next week. Currently, we're looking at next Wednesday as a meeting date for that. And the early afternoon meeting is being suggested. So possibly 1 p.m. because I know Councillor Moser has a commitment later in the day. So if that's still doable with folks, we will write up that agenda and send it out to everyone. It will be a single item agenda, just dealing with those applications for recommendation. So moved by Councillor Bachmann, seconded by Councillor Risser. And did you have a question about that, Councillor Risser, as well? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wondered to preclude us having a torturous 2-hour meeting deciding where hundreds of dollars is going, if staff could maybe provide a list of recommendations.
I don't know if Ms. Dagley wants to speak to that. I'll give you the opportunity. They do provide a lovely chart for us, and typically, I'll ask, flesh that out a bit. I know it's always helpful to know what has been done the previous year and what amounts we've given in the past and so on. There's kind of notes that go with that. But Ms. Dagley, did you want to speak to what we'd see, or if that's possible?
Well, I guess that's certainly that would be what I would be preparing, Your Worship. But if councillor members wanted to see something more, I certainly can work on that as well. Obviously, there have been some events that have been canceled due to the pandemic, but there's still more requests currently in the list than there is budget allotment for that.
And just a reminder too that we do have a grant policy, so we'd certainly circulate that as well for a reminder of kind of the criteria we had previously established as to where we would provide grants. And the Deputy Mayor and I think Councillor Moser had wanted to speak as well about this.
Thanks.
Your
Worship, just through to Lisa, the cancellation of the Folk Harbor Festival, will mean a reduction in requests from them. Do we have any confirmation from them about the Sunday concerts that we've also supported in the past? Are they going to continue those, or are those canceled as well?
I actually, maybe Deputy Mayor, I could defer to Ms. Renton. I believe she's had some recent correspondence with them regarding those items.
Right, Your Worship, yes, they are hoping to continue with them. And that's why they in turn would be very pleased if you made an earlier decision than July 16th, when your general government meeting is ordinarily scheduled for. So now, whether or not they're going to have a full concert series, Your Worship, I don't know. But at this point in time, they do want to go ahead with something.
Thank you.
So Councillor Moser and then Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, sort of touching on a little bit with what you had said and a little bit with what Councillor Risser had commented on. We do have a criteria for these grants, and how we could probably help in the process is if staff could grade these applications based on the criteria. You know, what have we been, you know, what they've been given the year before, what time, you know, was the application submitted, you know, how did they respond to an application they had or a grant they've had in previous years. These are sort of the things that may help us in terms of, you know, the priority given, especially on the circumstances we are this year.
So the suggestion, I guess, further to the earlier request for staff report on this would be just to flesh out some of the things that are in the policy in an evaluation or I guess an assessment of the applications that we have received from staff. Is that what you're suggesting, Councillor?
Well, precisely. I mean, like, you know, again, like we entertain applications that haven't fit the criteria or haven't, you know, like whether they're late, whether they're, you know, a lot of things, right? So, I mean, if we have these criterias, we may as well, it's no good to have them if we don't follow them. So those are some of the points where I think we need to be a little more diligent on moving forward with this stuff.
Your Worship, sorry.
No, certainly go ahead, Ms. Renton.
Well, I was just going to offer, Your Worship, I think we need to look at the policy. I think that's a great goal for next year. It might be a bit ambitious with probably less than a week to prepare that. I'm not sure. There are some things that we could do about, you know, is it complete? Are the financials there? But I think Ms. Dagley already vets that. Is it late? You know, I'm not sure what else you might be seeking. If there were some fairly fundamental things, we could certainly add those to an assessment report and try and get that to you by the end of the week. We do have to get the agenda package out and that document out by Friday afternoon. So if there's a few core things you'd like us to look at, more than pleased to try and do that for you, Your Worship.
And if I may, Your Worship, I guess that's what I was going to suggest, perhaps for this year would be that maybe we could just add a couple columns, amount of support from previous year, was the application received on time and is it complete? And just sort of like a couple checklists that could be added to the request.
Well, and that's exactly what we have there for our criteria now. So that's, yes, exactly.
Okay. So I think if it's a consensus of council, then just sort of a bit of an expanded on some of those basic things that are found in our policy, just to have an at a glance, some additional information that's at the ready when we review these. That would be greatly appreciated, given that there's even that much would be helpful, noting that there's not a lot of time for staff to look too deeply into this in preparation for the meeting if we want to try to have it next week. And if is that, then I'm assuming all of council would appreciate that. And so with the with what Ms. Dagley and Ms. Renton pointed out, then we can look for a chart of some sort to come, of a little bit more expansive chart than we've had in the past, will come out with the agenda package for us for this meeting. And thank you very much for doing that. And yes, Councillor Croft is waiting to speak too. So go ahead, Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Worship. So having the budget approved, so we've approved the $20,000 in the grant category, is that correct?
Yes, look for.
Okay. So again, as per previous years, this has been probably one of the most painful things we have to sit through. But where to cut so on, and where I voted against the budget, do I need to be there? That's the question, I guess. Because I will be voting against it regardless. So.
I don't think, I think that's a decision that's all up to you, Councillor Croft. So are any further, we do have the motion to go ahead with this meeting, I guess, next week. We actually did make that a motion, I believe, Ms. Renton, is that?
Yes,
how
you
we
yes, you
framed
did. It was moved. Yep, moved by Councillor Bachman and seconded by Councillor Risser
Thank you.
for 1 p.m. on Wednesday the 3rd.
Wednesday. Okay. So if there isn't anything further, I'd ask for the vote on the motion. So all in favor? No one's opposed. Motion is carried, and we'll have a meeting next week to review those grant applications. Thank you very much. And everything's gone dark on me here. So get my iPad up and running again. And we will move on to where are we for
The
time? So-
election, Your Worship. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I see that. I also see that we're at 3 o'clock. So we are an hour in. I think it might be a very good time to have a break for a recess. So if we'll have a 10-minute recess and reconvene at 3:12 or so, maybe 3:15 for good measure, and see everyone very shortly. Hello, everyone. We're coming back online slowly or gradually. So I received word during the break that Councillor Carnavale was going to leave for the rest of the meeting. He's currently undergoing some further treatment for his illness and is not feeling well. So we wish him well with that and just pass on his regrets for the remainder of this meeting. And would check that, see all of their members of council are here ready to go. Check with Ms. Renton and Ms. McCallum that we can reconvene, and I'll do that.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll defer to Heather.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so we will carry on with our agenda, calling the meeting back to order and carrying on from where we left off. Next on the agenda was some correspondence with respect to the municipal elections for 2020. The Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing provided us with notice that the October 17, 2020 election is proceeding. And the NSFM correspondence both prior to and following that notice is provided in the agenda package for everyone's information. Are there any comments or questions with respect to that of members of council? Don't see any. So we are, as Ms. Renton mentioned or pointed out, or Ms. Dagley, someone did, when we did our budget review, we've had to try to find additional funding in the budget process to cover off additional election expenses. We do budget over the course of council term to be able to fund the costs of an election, but with the really additional costs we're anticipating in dealing with our new reality with regard to public health concerns, there have been extra funds anticipated being required and therefore included in the budget. But if there isn't anything further, with respect
Your Worship.
to that. Oh, yes, please.
Sorry, may I just mention it's B speaking. The returning officer, our town solicitor, Pat Burke, as you well know, will be preparing a report for your next meeting on June 9th about this and what options there may be. And really, I think it comes down to having an alternate means bylaw, which you've looked at sort of in a cursory manner before. It would, in all likelihood, encompass telephone and other forms of, and I should say electronic voting, so computer, iPad, that sort of thing. As we know, there are risks associated with that, so precautions need to be taken. There also needs to be an enabling bylaw, so he will present a draft of that to you for your consideration. And based on cost estimates, we think that the cost of that technology alone will be approximately $10,000 based on what a similar sized municipality paid in 2016 for an e-election. And we would be using a bulk tender that the Halifax Regional Municipality Elections Office just conducted, in all likelihood to try and achieve some bulk procurement savings through that process. Because we have, of course, concerns not only about the electors and putting them potentially in harm's way if this vaccine is still present in October, and particularly with vulnerable sectors of our population, such as seniors and Veterans Unit residents, as well as residents of Harborview Haven and any hospital patients who might wish to vote, and trying to find the most secure means by which to do that. We also anticipate, Your Worship, that there could be some significant challenges with finding poll workers to work under such circumstances and how one would adequately sanitize any polling station, because in a paper environment with pencils and whatnot, it would be quite challenging. So an unfortunate turn of events, as you mentioned, the Federation of Municipalities continues to work on this to see if there can't be some option and perhaps some funding assistance if we must proceed in this manner. Thank you, Worship.
Thanks for spelling that out for us, Ms. Renton. And we will look forward to the report from our returning officer at a future meeting to see what our options might be. And so then we will move on to the next item on our agenda for today, and that is the Strategic Plan 2019 Progress Review, or report rather. And there was quite an extensive report provided for us to itemize and to detail all of the progress that's been made with respect to meeting our strategic planning goals. And I think it was really informative. Sometimes when you're so deeply entrenched in the work of the town, you don't always see the bigger picture and fully appreciate all of the accomplishments that have been achieved and all of the progress that's been made toward the quality of life we're looking to provide to our community. And I think actually during this really challenging time, it was nice to see some of that actually spelled out and itemized for us. So it is for our information. Any comments or thoughts or questions with respect to the report from members of council? No, I don't see any indication of that, but I would just actually suggest that in anticipation of the comprehensive community plan draft report that we're going to get, I think it's very helpful to have this report as well for use to, as I think it's a movement from one plan into another, to see that there's some continuation of what we're seeing as goals and objectives in an earlier planning process of council. And this strategic plan was put in place 2 councils ago, this council previous to this one. So it's really nice to see that progress has been made in following that document, and we'll be moving into a new process, likely for an incoming council. So certainly provide that to our consultants too, if it may be useful to them in their work finalizing the plan. So if there isn't anything further on that, we'll look to the next item on our agenda is a request of Edward J. Kelly for 82 Kemp Street to be removed from the town's Heritage Conservation District. And we do have in our agenda package a staff report, which was provided by our Heritage Manager, and also some correspondence from Mr. Kelly, further correspondence with respect to his request. So put that out for council discussion. You're all moving on me. Okay, I see Councillor Risser would like to speak.
Thank you, Worship. My opinion on this might be contingent on what the go forward plan for the heritage bylaw is and whether these concerns of Ted's can be accommodated through a more general process or are necessary through this application. So I'm wondering if Arthur can just speak to that.
Okay, Mr. McDonald, are you on the line with us? You were? Are you still? There you are. Yes. Please.
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you very much. One of the options that I pointed out in the report was a referral of the request to the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw Review. That would be one option. There is the option to refuse the application outright. And the third option is to actually go through the procedure of actually going through a public participation meeting and a public hearing by referring it to the Heritage Advisory Committee to consider. So those are basically the three options that council has available to them as part of this request.
Right, yes. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, and thank you, Ms. McCallum, for sharing those options on the screen for all of us. So, yes, Councillor Croft.
Your worship, I'd like to make a motion that we accept option number 3.
To initiate. Sorry. I'm getting feedback. Yeah. Okay, I think that's better. To refer the letter to the Heritage Advisory Committee to consider and to initiate the process for holding a public participation meeting and report back to council. That's being moved by Councillor Croft. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Moser. Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Your worship, this question may be through to Dawn. Is it by statute that it has to be referred to the Heritage Advisory Committee? I think we already have a report from Arthur, which is going to be what the Heritage Advisory Committee is going to recommend. So I don't want to waste anybody's time by having to go through that public participation process. Is there any way we can go directly to a public hearing, and skip that Heritage Advisory Committee process? I had a question to Dawn, I think. Or Arthur, if you're okay with that. Hi, Dawn.
Hi. I've got the ponytail on. It really should, it's through the Heritage Advisory Committee. So it's their public participation program that should be followed. That is going the proper way to take it to a public participation meeting under Heritage. Now, it's very separate than PAC.
But is that mandated or is it optional? If we want to take it directly to a public hearing.
If I may, I outlined in the report the requirement through the statutes that require a public participation meeting and a public hearing with regards to an amendment to the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. So it is a statutory requirement. And I included that in the report.
So it is the same, basically, same kind of process, but just a different committee level. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Just to clarify through to Arthur. Yes, we have to go through the public participation at the HAC level, but there's no requirement for council to accept their recommendation. We can overrule their recommendation.
That is correct. Yes.
Right. So, contrary to the other, and I think sort of carrying on from what Councillor Risser was asking earlier, that with our other recent requests for changes to these kind of significant documents of council, there was some urgency to the requests with respect to business operations and to sales of property. And I think that necessitated a response of council that was respectful of the citizen requests. I don't know that this request has that same sense of urgency. This is, as was pointed out by Mr. Kelly himself, this is an opportune time. We are going through these reviews of significant documents, a thorough review, and further to one-off here and a one-off there. It seems like this would be a very having this request before us and putting it into the greater context of what does deserve or should truly be included in these heritage district and whatever buffer zones or whatever are provided, I think it begs the question of a full review of the mapping and so on. And I would certainly far prefer that this be deferred to that fuller process. And at that point in time, look at this property with all of the arguments that are put forth and any other documents that may have, similarly been included in a broad sweep of the mapping process. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one is, I get the sense that I'm the swing vote on this too, and it's quite perplexing for me in that I tend to agree with you that I would like to see this done in general terms as well. But I also think that since we went down the road of the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw in the form that we started out, a significant amount of information has come to light through the applications and through Project Lunenburg and through public participation meetings that suggests that some revision is needed. I'd sooner see that revision done in general terms, but in the absence of that revision being done, I might be in favor of this application. So I'm just wondering if Arthur could speak to that.
Mr. McDonald, are you able to respond?
If I understand you correctly, through the worship, are you referring to the concept of trying to minimize applications of this nature in the future, which I'm drafting a report for the next HAC committee with regards to the possibility of doing a new background study. And I have a report that recommends loosening up some of those restrictions. Like we have criteria within the plan and bylaw that requires public hearings for certain types of developments. And I'd like to get feedback from the committee as well as council with regards to the possibility of loosening those criteria up a bit so that not so many applications have to go through council for approval, that some of them can be dealt with at the staff level. Does that address your question?
You're getting at what I'm talking about, Arthur. It's a matter of how do we best balance the need for flexibility and the need to accommodate modernity with the need to protect, to conserve heritage. So it just seemed to me that the balance was a little off in terms of what was raised out of all these public engagements. And so I wanted to get a sense of, that was going to go back to be, aligned with the CCP and with community feeling and all that, so that all of these issues could be dealt with in general terms. So thanks.
I just have Your Worship, if I may.
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
If you proceed with, say, option 3, I'm not sure if the other application, the 6 properties with ABCO, if council waived or required any fees to cover the costs for the public participation meeting and the public hearing, the advertisements and the mailouts. As you noted in my report, under the financial implications, we did not budget any extra money with regards to taking an application through this process in this manner. But so I'm looking for council's direction with regards to those costs if we go through with option 3, that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing that out, Mr. McDonald. Yes, these the processes do come with costs, and typically when people make application, they pay the costs of the review, and we have waived those costs or those fees for applicants in the past, but that's not clear from the motion what the expectation of council are with respect to this particular request. Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Thanks, Your Worship. I sit on HAC and I'm still a little confused on what's the best way to treat this going forward. We did an extensive review of the document and everything, and when reading through the information that Mr. Kelly provided, I wasn't aware that there was such a thing as a buffer zone because that was never discussed, to my knowledge, in any of the meetings that I was to before. So I was a little bit surprised that such a zone actually existed. I was aware that there was a discrepancy between one side of Creighton Street and the other, but didn't realize that that didn't mean it was a buffer zone or that there was different guidelines and procedures in place for one side of the street compared to the other. And if you look at the map, that all of the north side of Creighton Street, all of the loop with Hobson Street, and lots of other properties that in and around the town don't fit within the guidelines. So I'm still not sure what's the best way to go forward with this, but I agree with Mr. Kelly 100% that I don't want to do this on a case-by-case basis. The best way to do this is to make sure that the policy is sound and correct, and then we can probably eliminate doing that. But the best way to get there, I'm not sure. So back through HAC possibly, but do we have, after that, do we still need to proceed with the public hearing? Then I'm not sure.
Mr. McDonald, I think, wanted to speak to that buffer zone or some part of what Councillor Bachman was speaking to, and then the Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to point out, to be clear, that this property is not in a buffer zone. It's actually within the Heritage Conservation District.
Okay.
So it's this district actually surrounds the property, and if Heather could bring up the map so we can actually show that, that would be great. I don't know if she's able to.
Yeah,
Heather,
stand
are
by
you
a moment. Well, I am just,
Oh.
give me one moment to resize.
Okay.
Just had that.
Okay, this is not the Heritage Conservation District. So you'll have to go down to the next map. And if you zoom into this map, the second page down, you can see it much clearer. This is the Heritage Conservation District, and the arrow is pointing to Mr. Kelly's property. So you can see that the buffer, the district line does go down Creighton Street. Then it wraps around the open space or the lands that the town owns on Blockhouse Hill. And it comes behind the Blockhouse building itself and downwards. So it's clearly within the Heritage Conservation District. And it's not like lot A1 on Dufferin Street that was on the edge of the architectural control area. This particular property is well within the Heritage Conservation District. So that's what I meant by poking a hole in the Heritage Conservation District. If we remove this property from the district, it would be almost like Swiss cheese. It would have a hole surrounding that property, where all the property surrounding that property will remain in the Heritage Conservation District. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. That's very helpful. And the Deputy Mayor wanted to speak as well.
Well, Your Worship, it's kind of an island out there. Maybe we should look at, removing all of the, as soon, my hope is that at some point it's going to be surrounded by other homes that are not in the district. It's kind of sitting out there like an island on that street. And to me, it would make a lot of sense to maybe remove that whole block. That's the only house in there. And there was no building in there until, Ted pretty much rebuilt what was there, and it wasn't an old building to start with. So, I agree with option 3, but a concern that I've got, and Mr. Kelly is a very thorough individual, and I really worry about the need to give anything to Parks Canada and sort of maybe raise a concern where there isn't one. So I'm hoping that if we approve the option 3, that there'd be some discussion around the need to inform anyone other than ourselves, about doing this. So.
I was just going to refer back to option 3 to see what was included all in the motion. And I asked Councillor Croft to perhaps clarify that, and Councillor Moser wanted to speak. And then Councillor Risser.
So when I looked at those last maps that Arthur showed with us, the map previous to that, so I am assuming that is the UNESCO zone that we were looking at. And then we have a heritage zone. I think part of the issue is we got so many zones and so many different things. I think as sort of like back to what Deputy Mayor McGee says, if we might consolidate some of these zones, we might eliminate a lot of our problems, because we have one zone for one thing, one zone for another thing. And I think we should consolidate them, that it makes sense. And then we probably wouldn't have these issues going forward. So to Councilor Risser's point, I mean, that's the thing I think we need to incorporate in our new bylaws moving forward, so that we're not always, flipping over these things. I was always under the assumption that the academy was not in the UNESCO zone, right? And yet, when you look at that heritage zone map, it's inside the heritage zone. It's not in the UNESCO zone, and it all gets very confusing. So I guess my point would be, let's get these zones in sync with one another, and what is the dominant one we want to abide by? Is it UNESCO, heritage? What needs to be the proper zone?
Okay, Mr. McDonald, perhaps you could respond to that, and then
Your
Councillor.
Worship, just a point of order. Mr. McDonald is participating in the debate, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Oh, well, he's an expert, and he's our expert. So he's providing us with additional information.
He needs to be asked.
Okay, I'm asking then.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, did you want to clarify about the zoning and the buffer zones or heritage districts?
I would appreciate the offer to clarify that the UNESCO World Heritage Site and the UNESCO World Heritage Buffer are not part of our Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. I did talk to representatives from Parks Canada with regards to the possibility of amending the buffer zone that they do have, because it really doesn't make sense to me, because it includes some properties that are away from the UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's a gap, especially along Creighton Street, but the buffer zone was done years ago, I believe, and it's just representative of the properties that the town owned at the time. So just to be clear, to amend the UNESCO boundaries is almost like a 5-year process. Parks Canada said it's very difficult to do. I really don't think that we should go there in that direction, but we by all means can look at our Heritage Conservation District and take a look at the boundaries for that. Councillor
Risser.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to point out that Ted is raising his hand, and I know it's at the discretion of the chair, but he seems to want to speak, and I didn't want that to go unnoticed.
Thank you for pointing that out. And Councillor Croft, did you want to speak, or did I misread?
No, I do. I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to defer this till the next HAC meeting has a chance to review this and then make a recommendation back to council. The thought that the whole block area should be removed from the heritage district. So if that would be appropriate, I would withdraw the motion.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm clear on what you're suggesting. I need to bring up that option 3, which is the motion on the floor, I believe. So I'll just need to refresh on what that says to see if I can make sense of what you're asking. I'm sorry. Councillor Moser, is it to that you wanted to speak?
Well, yes, I mean, the motion does defer to the HAC, so I mean, at least that way we get the process going. We don't want to bounce it back to HAC and then bounce it back to council, which bounces it back to HAC. So I'm quite happy with the motion that's on the floor.
So the motion was to review the letter of request dated May 1st, 2020 to the Heritage Advisory Committee to consider and to initiate the process for holding a public participation meeting and report back to council. This process will also include a report to, so it carries on. This process will also include a report to the World Heritage Committee of Via Parks Canada, which will be reviewed by the HAC and submitted to council for their approval prior to being submitted to Parks Canada. So all of that is included in option 3. So, yeah, to your question then, Councillor Croft, the motion does say to refer it to HAC for further study to come back to us through recommendation following, I guess, following a public information meeting, which would be the process. Unless I suppose they could recommend otherwise if they didn't want to take it through to a public information meeting. Is that correct, Mr. McDonald? Is us referring it to them necessitate a public information meeting?
You could, council has the right to request the HAC to consider it and report back to council. It's just that a public participation meeting has to be held before a public hearing is held.
Okay.
If you catch my drift there.
Is that clear to everyone that it doesn't, it may or may not then include a public information?
If council wants to proceed to do the amendment, council has to hold a public hearing. But prior to that, council is required through their HAC to hold a public participation meeting. Prior to that, you may pass a motion just referring it to HAC for like a preliminary review and have them report back to council. That's perfectly all right. So that's a viable option.
Yeah, I guess so. The motion as it is now states that it's to initiate the process, and it mentions the public information session. So thanks. Yes, Councillor Moser.
Well, the other nice thing about if the HAC does the public participation meeting, it gives, at least at that point, it gives the committee plus council, who will probably pay attention to this, a feel for what the public, the general feel for the public is for this to happen or not happen.
Okay. I'm concerned with the timing of this as well. These public processes take a lot of time. We're, as I said earlier in the meeting, anticipating a comprehensive community plan draft document within a week, or within this week, I think. And then there's, a phased process of when the other information would be other documents would be reviewed, the planning documents, which would be then informed by the comprehensive community plan. It was agreed, I think, by council that the Heritage Conservation District Plan and bylaw would be not done separately, but we would receive those draft documents of our revised planning documents and then review those along with the information that was provided by the committee review to decide, further on amendments to our heritage planning documents. And I just see that starting a separate process now on this individual property is not necessarily a wise move, given the timing of when we're reviewing all the other documents to a fuller extent. So, yes, Councillor Moser.
Well, just one more question through to Arthur. So can we change the heritage zone verbatim, or is that something that we have to go through a provincial process as well?
Yes, Your Worship. Are you referring to the Heritage Conservation District boundaries? This is the process that is required. You have to go through a public participation meeting as well as a public hearing to alter or change the actual Heritage Conservation District plan. Now, the Heritage Conservation District map, which outlines the boundaries, is in both your plan and your bylaw. It's map 2 in the plan and schedule A in the bylaw. Both of those maps are required to be changed or amended. So they need to go through the process.
Thank you, Arthur. Yeah, so I guess then the question, then that bodes the bigger question, what needs to be changed? Do we change one off, or do we change something that is a overall underlying? Is it an overall underlying problem? I guess that's the question you should ask.
Okay, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I tend to agree with you about process in terms of starting a new process at this stage and dealing with this application as a one-off. But at the same time, I think Ted has raised some important concerns, and that while we're trying to align these documents and get a new background study, I think the important thing in all of this is to get the new background study and make sure that that's aligned with our comprehensive planning process and maximizing flexibility for our citizens within the constraints of conserving heritage. And that's the direction I think I'd be in favor of. So I'm going to vote against the motion.
Okay. So as Councillor Risser had pointed out earlier, Mr. Kelly is in attendance. He has raised his hand to address council. So I need to get the will of council on hearing him at this point, as there was no formal request for presentation. So I've got a majority of council in favor. So Ms. McCallum, can you help with giving us the opportunity to hear Mr. Kelly?
Yep, I've given him permission to speak.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, I think, yeah, there you go. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And good afternoon, members of council. I'm sure the council's well aware of a large issue that exists about architectural control and the measures that are used to preserve heritage. My request is on a much more narrow ground than that, though there is a relationship. I'm really saying in my request that this property was incorrectly included in the Heritage Conservation District in the first place. It doesn't even satisfy the criteria that were established for the boundary. And I draw your attention to the attachment F in the Heritage Manager's report, where he points out in terms of the boundary that it's there because or this property rather, is included because it is adjacent to the old town and it has architectural, historical, and contextual continuity with the old town, and for all intents and purposes as a part of it, even though not part of the original town site. Now, I think that if you look at the photograph, which I included in my request or attached to the memorandum, I think it's quite evident that this property or this structure, which was not erected until the 1950s, 1954, I think, was never really part of the old town, and was never part, has no architectural significance, had no architectural significance or historical significance. In fact, when I canvassed the property owners that live in the old town, they had no idea that the Heritage Conservation District boundary included the property to Kemp Street. So that's one aspect. If you say, well, it wasn't the structure that was on it, it was the property itself, then you've got an inconsistency, because there are equally all sorts of adjacent properties there that have not been included. And it becomes arbitrary, as I pointed out in my request. So I think that you have to think of this as a particular circumstance and not view it in the larger issue. There is, of course, a relationship, because you have to do something about the contentious problems that are arising from this variation in boundaries and the architectural control measures that have been imposed on them. But I would submit that that's a separate issue. And I'd also say that in terms of the way the motion or the options are drafted, there is no, as I read it, obligation on the part of the town to report to the World Heritage Committee. This is not a question of major construction or redevelopment. It's just correcting an error which was made some years ago. So I suggest that it be looked at in the context in which the request was raised. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So we still do have the motion on the floor, and the motion does speak specifically to option 3, and that does include the report to the World Heritage Committee, as Mr. Kelly mentions, as it's written for us. So the question is there, or the motion has been moved and seconded, and I'm looking for any further discussion before I call for a vote on the motion. There is none. Then all in favor of the motion? Okay, and opposed? So the motion is there's a tie vote with Councillor Croft, Deputy Mayor McGee, and Councillor Moser voting in favor, and Councillors Bachman, Risser, and myself in opposition. So the motion falls. And so we are left still with the request. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Worship. I'll move to refer this to the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw process.
Okay. Councillor Risser is moving that it move to the process, the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw Review, seconded by Councillor Moser. Thank you. Is there discussion on this new motion? None? Okay, would you like to move right to the vote? Yes, Councillor Bachman, sorry.
I just hope that by doing it this way, we'll get to where we need to go as far as the fact of taking all aspects into consideration, that we don't have to review this on multiple times, that Mr. Kelly's request gets due consideration as part of this process. So just hoping that all of this can be achieved by going down that road.
Thank you for those comments. I concur. I think it's a very legitimate request. It deserves our attention and a full review of why it's there and should it be. And I don't know that it was an error, as Mr. Kelly contends, but there are some questions that come to mind as to why this is, and perhaps the background study will help clarify some of that, or whatever comes of the fuller review process.
Your worship, it's B speaking.
Yes, Ms.
I wondered, your worship, for the purposes of the motion, for which I have the mover as being Councillor Risser and the seconder being Councillor Moser, worship, are we specifically referring to option 2 in the staff report? I just wanted to clarify the wording to make sure for Mr. McDonald's purposes and otherwise it was properly recorded, your worship. Thank you.
So I defer to the.
That was my understanding. That's the option where we refer it to the general process and it gets considered there. Yeah.
Yes, and Councillor Moser, any difference of opinion? No, you're good. Okay, thank you. So if we're clear on the motion, then is there any further discussion? I will call for the question then. All in favor of the motion? And there is no one to oppose. All are in favor. So the motion is carried and it will get referred to the fuller process. Thank you very much for that fulsome discussion on that request. We are just at the hour of intended adjournment. We have 2 other items which have been deferred from our previous meeting. Actually 3, sorry, because there's also a council in camera recommendation. So I look to you for moving ahead with these, I think, relatively short agenda items. I've got a few thumbs up there. So majority I see, so we will carry on then and see if we can conclude the items on our agenda today. So first off, we have the Councillor Moser with motion to approve the Lunar Brigand District Fire Department expense claim policies amendment request to allow variances from preset kilometer limits. So, and this is so moved, and I've got bunches of seconders. So Councillor Croft, I think I saw your fingers first. So thank you. Moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Croft, that we move the amendments of the various policies that need to be amended to accommodate this change. Any discussion on this? I know it's been before us a few times. So no, and none, hearing none. So all in favor? There's no one to oppose, so that motion is carried. Thank you very much. And those amendments will be made to the policies. Next, under Public Works Department, we've had a request with respect to a special event that has taken place in the community for a few years for the Golden Retrievers Gathering for July. And there's a bit of a to the point of policies and a little bit of deviations. There's concern about insurance with this one. They do ask us to waive that requirement of our policy in the request. And I noticed for further correspondence on this that, of course, there is some uncertainty as to whether or not this is able to proceed as they typically have. But turn it over to the floor for comments, questions, thoughts on this request. Yes, Councillor Bachman.
To me, I approve the request. I don't see how they need insurance to do what they do. What would be stopping 5, 10, 15 people from just saying, hey, let's get together and go for a walk, and then proceed to get down a street? And I don't think there's anything the town could do about it. I don't think I would need insurance to take my dog for a walk and get together with 10 people and say, hey, let's go take my dog for a walk and have you join me, as long as we're following protocol that's before us now with the social distancing and everything. So to make this a public event and then to say that we need insurance, to me makes absolutely no sense. The more you try to put rules and regulations and things, the more difficult it becomes. So I think for me, I don't have a problem with them holding their event. If it comes to just giving them a thumbs up, I'm all in favor of giving them the thumbs up. To make this anything more difficult than that, I'm not. I don't follow the logic, I guess.
Okay, Councillor Moser wished to speak. I think I may call on Ms. Renton to speak further to that, but Councillor Moser, you go ahead.
Well, I was hoping Councilor Bachman was making a motion. I would have seconded it. But at the same token, what do we do about the 150 motorcycles that come through town every year? I mean, no, they don't even ask permission. They just go on their ride and they buzz through town, and everybody quite happy to see them go, right? So I don't see where there's a problem here.
I will speak to that and then turn it over for the I guess fuller details from someone who's better versed than I am. But I think the very fact that they ask permission is the issue. It could happen. The motorcycles happen. They don't ask permission. They don't ask for town's blessing on this. They don't ask for the town to then assume the responsibility for having multiple people in the middle of a public street, and they just do it. When you take your dog for a walk, if you jaywalk, if you walk in the road or whatever, you don't ask permission. But the town isn't assuming responsibility or liability for that to happen. When it is, when permission is requested and it is therefore seen as a publicly sanctioned event. I attended a 2-hour workshop on FCM on this last year, and it becomes then a big deal. And we then assume responsibilities that we wouldn't if permission were not asked in the first place. So that's the question, and or the reason why, from my perspective, but certainly if Ms. Renton has anything further to add, please do.
No, Your Worship, I wouldn't dare. I think you've said it very well. Our insurer has indicated, I would just say briefly that it is their recommendation that the group maintain or obtain, I beg your pardon, liability insurance, and that they be required to obviously follow provincial protocols. That being said, if they don't, and there was a claim made for an injury, if somebody or an animal was hurt or injured and made a claim against the town, they indicate that they would probably insure us, but that it could go against the town's claims history when we go to renew our policy. It could impact. So, of course, out of an abundance of caution, they are advising that since this group, as you said, is seeking an application and sanctioning of the town, that they should be held to account for insurance and whatnot. Now, there was a motion, Your Worship, and geez, I said I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll read the motion of last year if it's of any assistance. It was to approve the walk and noting that the event organizer is responsible for ensuring the necessary measures are taken to ensure the safety of all participants, spectators, staff, volunteers, and other users of the public roads impacted by the event. And I don't know if you were considering such a motion again, if you would say in the town, make it abundantly clear to the organizers, the town is assuming no responsibility for the event. Or you I guess the further option would be to say, thank you, but your application can't be approved because you don't meet our requirements, but we wish you well. And as you said, the challenge is when they come and ask for official approval. That's it, your worship. I'll say nothing further, sorry.
Thanks. Yes, Councillor Moser.
Well, the candle's burning low here, so let's get on with this.
So you want to, yes, okay, Councillor. Bachmann.
Whatever that motion there we passed last year, I'll move it for this year.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor Moser, and seconded by Councillor Bachmann and Councillor Risser. Second, will you look to speak to it? Sorry.
Just one quick thing, that in light of the current context and the additional complications, that I wouldn't want them to get confused in thinking that any kind of town approval overrides whatever provincial emergency direction might be on the books at that stage. So just make it abundantly clear.
Yes, thank you. So Ms. Renton, is that clear to you as far as the motion is concerned that's been moved and seconded by Councillors Moser and Bachmann?
Yes, I can add a reference to the component of health as per provincial directives.
Sure.
Yes, thumbs up on that. Thank you. So is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of the new motion? Okay, a motion is carried, and we will move on to our final piece of business for today, which is the recommendation from an in-camera discussion, and Councillor Risser.
So moved.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Moser. Thank you very much. And is there a draft? There's not a specific draft motion, but or is there? I think it was just to approve the.
Much as the title indicates, your worship.
Sorry, okay.
I would just incorporate that into a motion if that was acceptable to council.
To renew their Blue Nose Drive parking space license agreement in 2020 as per previous terms. And I think the request from the solicitor was amount and dates. And I think what was in the 2019 makes sense, June 1st to October 31st, right. I think, and the $500, so.
And no doubt, your worship, you'd want to as well add some reference to the provincial COVID-19 protocols and requirements.
Yes. I think that would be a very wise additional add as a line. I think council's probably agreeable to putting that in the either the motion or the correspondence that goes with it, or both. Yes. Okay. So we have that motion then moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And there's the motion then to adjourn would be entertained. Thank you, Councillor Risser and Councillor Croft. All in favor? Don't go before we vote. Motion is approved. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. You'll get your next agenda for our next meeting very shortly. Thanks. And goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining.